Aloha. Half a day. We're going to go ahead and get started with our April installment of our Slice of PI-CASC seminar series, led by the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center, or PI-CASC. I'm Brad Romine. I'm the Deputy Director of the PI-CASC University Consortium, and I'll be your moderator today. The Slice of PI-CASC seminar series provides a platform for sharing ongoing and state-of-the-art climate adaptation research and science to management applications in Hawaii, the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands, and beyond. This presentation, folks online, is being recorded and will be available on the PI-CASC website under news and events, should you want to share it with anybody after or go back and review it. For those joining us online, welcome. Please keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. We will have time for questions following the presentation. Also, feel free to leave those questions in the chat along the way or save them until the end. At the conclusion of our seminar, again, for those online, please complete our short survey to help us in planning future PI-CASC seminars. The survey will pop up after you log off from the Zoom meeting. For folks in the room, thanks for being here in person. We do have lunch coming. It's running a little late. I think what we're going to suggest and do here is that we have two speakers today. We're going to transition in about 20 minutes from Elliot to Glenn, and so that might be a good chance. Hopefully the lunch is there then. We'll be playing a video that they brought as well to kind of make that transition and grab lunch at that time. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers, Dr. Elliot Parsons and Dr. Glenn Dulia, who will be sharing with us today about Pacific regional invasive species and climate change and Micronesian regional biosecurity perspectives. Elliot is a specialist with the Pacific Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change, or RISC Management Network, a large collaborative effort that seeks to understand the impacts of climate change on invasive species in the Pacific and promote existing and develop new climate adaptation strategies for invasive species management. Elliot previously spent over 10 years in conservation, management, and research as the Pu'uwa'awa coordinator with the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Forestry and Wildlife. He has a PhD in fish and wildlife biology from the University of Montana. He also teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in wildlife science at the University of Hawaii, Hilo. Glenn is currently an assistant professor of plant pathology at the Western Pacific Tropical Research Center at the University of Guam. He previously served as the invasive species coordinator for the Guam Department of Agriculture, Biosecurity Division, and Plant Pathology Area Identifier for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He is principal investigator on several federally funded invasive species management programs at Guam's port of entry. Glenn earned his PhD in microbiology from the University of California, Berkeley. So with that, welcome, Elliot. Welcome, Glenn. Thank you very much for being here today, and I'll pass it over to you, Elliot. Thank you. Okay, might need some help pulling up the PowerPoint. If you do, let me know. Okay, so I think we're good. I think it'll go away in a second. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Brad. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to PI-CASC for inviting me here today and for all the support for Pacific RISC, which I'll be talking with you about today. And aloha kako and hafade talofa. Thank you so much for joining us. So we know invasive species are driving the conservation crisis in the Pacific Islands. Invasive species are implicated and involved in a large number of extinctions that have happened over the last few hundred years. And that's across systems, terrestrial, marine, aquatic. There are many different kinds of invasive species, which are species from outside of the Pacific Islands that cause harm to the environment, the economy, human health, and native species. But it's not just conservation. than invasive species impact. Invasive species here impact agroforestry systems, food security, marine ecosystems with potential impacts to tourism, agriculture, sustainable livelihoods, and invasive species lead to the loss of traditions, practices, and impact important ecosystem services like groundwater recharge. We know that invasive species are a huge issue in the Pacific Islands from a lot of work that's been done. This is just a visual representation of non-native species richness. The continental United States and Hawaii, showing all of the dots on the Hawaii side compared to very few in the others. So invasive, huge issue, especially in comparison to other places. And we know the invasive species that are arriving they're still arriving, they're increasing over time. This is a graph showing work by Kelsey Brock and Kurt Daler, published in 2021. And this is looking at the number of naturalized plants in Hawaii from 1900 to 2020. And naturalized plants, they get here from elsewhere, they establish, and then they start spreading on their own. And as you can see, that line through time is going up. And it equates to about an average rate of 12 new naturalized species per year they get here. And if you look at the line as well, it looks like the rate is potentially increasing recently in the last few decades. But the Pacific Islands also face climate change. Climate change in terms of warming oceans, acidification, coral bleaching, sea level rise, flooding, and erosion, also increased drought intensity and severity, as well as for wildfires, potential changes in rainfall, and increased storm intensity. And I want to give a quick shout out to the Pacific Islands National Climate Assessment Team that they're in DC right now at one of the final meetings working on the chapter that should be out soon. But in addition to those stressors, there is evidence in just the last few years that those stressors may even combine to have an even larger impact. And so this is recent research looking at compound events under climate change. And so that's the idea that extreme climatic events can combine together to have even larger effects, such as wind and precipitation, heat waves, and drought, which together can have a large effect on human communities and ecosystems. So our question for today is, how will climate change affect invasive species? Unfortunately, we don't know that much about this in the Pacific Islands, especially as compared to certain areas on the continent for a number of reasons. But it's really important that we figure out how this is happening and how it might happen in the future, because invasive species management is costly and expensive. We need to know where to target our efforts with limited funds to invest. And so if species are changing their distributions, if some species are becoming more impactful or less impactful, we need to know about pivot, and we can shift our attention to areas. There are a number of articles that have come out in the popular press in the last few years. I just wanted to, you've probably seen some of them. This one looking at climate change, drawing invasive species to the Arctic. Here is an article that was in the Smithsonian not too long ago, how climate change is helping invasive species take over. And to address this, a few studies, this was a meta-analysis, so it's a study of studies that was done last year, and they asked the question, how does climate change, how do invasive species and the interaction combine to impact ecosystems? And what they did was they looked at those effects alone, and then they looked at them in combination. And they wanted, can those impacts be larger than you'd expect just based on the additive effects, or smaller? And what they found was that in 29% of the cases, that was about a third, impacts were synergistic. So they were either worse than expected based on the individual impacts, or they were better than expected. And to me, what this implies is that we really need to figure this out. We really need to figure out how climate change is affecting invasive species, especially for those cases where that impact is going to be a lot worse than we expect. So how might climate change affect the invasion process in the Pacific? It's useful to look at the stages of invasion, and maybe some of you are familiar with this. Invasive species go through stages before they become impactful in a new location. Typically, they're transported, they're introduced into a new place, they establish, then they start to spread, and then they have impacts. And so how might climate change affect these different stages? Climate change will likely open up new pathways of introduction. This is a picture showing the Arctic as the loss of sea ice may lead to transport from new areas and also higher propagule pressure or more individuals being brought over. As well, increased disturbances. So climate change is expected to increase the severity, the duration of storms, and the impacts they have, allowing non-native species and invasive species to get a foothold. There's also higher climatic suitability. So certain areas will become more suitable for certain invasive species than they are now. As well, certain areas will probably become less suitable. Invasive species might become more competitive. Part of this has to do with more CO2 in the atmosphere, and that influencing water stress. Invasive species might be able to respond to changes more quickly. And then all of this will likely lead to increased abundance and density and therefore impact of invasive species. So what are some of the consequences of this nexus that we can think about here in the Pacific Islands? Distributional shifts and have been predicted by a number of model projections. Hotspots of invasion might shift. So areas that are heavily invaded right now could be moving upslope. We could have reduced effectiveness of biocontrol and herbicides, making it harder to manage species that we currently have. And all to decrease the resilience of our ecosystems. In other words, those ecosystems may bounce back more slowly and become more invaded, more opportunities for invasion in the future. And on changes in, because that a lot of the work has been done there. A recent paper introduced what's called the BioShifts database, and these authors have gathered evidence for over 30,000 range shifts of species across the world due to climate change from about 260 studies for over 12,000 species. And these range shifts are ubiquitous. They're ubiquitous across many different taxonomic groups. And they are definitely, so you can see a zero line in there with the velocity of change. On the right side, most of those are moving poleward, and then on the left, they're moving towards the equator. So we can expect a lot of species are going to be moving poleward, and a lot of species are going to be shifting up in distribution, which is also on the right side of that line in the middle. So given these changes that we're facing now and that we're likely to face in the future, how will we chart our course? What are we going to do about it? So I'd like to introduce the Pacific Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Network, which Dr. Glenn and I and some of the audience are a part of. This group formed in 2019 to address the nexus of climate change and invasive species. And it expanded in 2021 and 2022 and now includes members of the leadership team from Hawaii and all of the US affiliated Pacific Islands. This is our area. It is a very large area, larger than the continental United States. Includes over 2,000 islands, 20 languages, and a lot of different invasive species issues, but great potential for sharing lessons learned. The Pacific risk isn't the first one, and it's not the only one. The first the first risk group started in the Northeast with 3 researchers who were facing managers about these species coming up from the Southeast. How do you deal with them? And they created the Northeast RISC as a boundary spanning organization to try to bring managers and researchers together to share ideas and to find out what research was needed. And the ideas spread other regions. And so now we have Pacific RISC, there's one in the Northwestern US, East, and then Canada is joining as well, some of the Northern partners, and there's talk about a Midwest risk group starting up too. And the formation of these groups is really to bridge these 2 historically separate invasive species and climate change. And to do translational work. And so the idea, but it's not necessarily accessible to the land managers that need it. It might be behind it. There might be a lot of not relevant information, and a lot of that needs to be translated to management implications so that it can be used by. In 2021, Pacific RISC, led by Dr. Laura Brewington, initiated a survey, which was a lot of land working in and around, and they asked folks what was needed and was their interest. And there was great interest in this intersection of climate change and invasive species. And as you can see, there was a desire for things such as climate projections at appropriate scales, collaborative projects, better communication, better understanding of uncertainty, things like that. And so to base off of those needs that were expressed, what Pacific RISC does, we facilitate a network of all those interested in joining us. There's a listserv you can join. You can get information on that from me. We want to create a space for engagement with these topics. We want to promote relevant research. Excuse me. We want to develop information sharing strategies, management strategies, and then try to prioritize research that's needed. We have a webinar series that we try to do almost monthly on topics related to the nexus of climate change and invasive species. In terms of synthesis products, we are taking important publications and tools and then distilling that down to management considerations and take-home points that we send out to our listserv. So the manager could read that quickly and know what are the main messages of that work and how to translate that for what they're doing. In development as well, and we have some great guidance on this from the other risk groups, we want to develop fact sheets which synthesize a bunch of information around a particular topic. And these are called management challenges. And so we'll be doing that in the future and then sending that out to our group. As well, we're conducting a literature review, and there is evidence for the intersection of climate change with invasive species in the Pacific. A lot of it is modeling work. There's not as much empirical work, but overall, there's evidence for range expansion across many different taxonomic groups due to climate change. But then there's also evidence for range contraction. And so that's, for example, plants that are already at their upper elevational limit, lying islands that are potentially going to be inundated by sea level rise. One of our best examples of this, and this was the topic of a webinar that you can watch on our website last fall, is that due to climate warming, mosquitoes are moving upslope and introducing diseases, including avian malaria, which are having a huge impact on the native forest birds of Hawaii, some of which are 10 years. As well, I wanted to point towards work on plants. So this was a topic of one manager summaries that we sent out. And it was a modeling study done in 2014 that found that predicted to increase in Hawaii's upper elevation areas, which is where most of the biodiversity is in Hawaii. We're going to be following up on that idea with this upcoming webinar. So please join us Wednesday, April 12th, where we'll be talking with Dr. Clay Triernick, Mike Walker, and Emma Ewan about changing climate and wildfire in Hawaii. A couple of quick examples before we move to the next part of this. So how might climate change exacerbate invasive species impacts in the Pacific? Here is just a short list that we have at the moment, but we're looking at increased movement, establishment, and spread of both new and existing invasive species. We're looking at increased wildfire, drought, and storm severity, which is going to reduce the resilience of ecosystems, making them more prone to invasions. We're looking at increased spread of disease due to warmer temperatures. We're looking at warmer, more acidic oceans that will reduce coral reef resilience and their ability to buffer storms, and reduce water availability, which will impact both people and native species. Is there a silver lining? I want to mention one quick thing. Let's take a look at the table in the back with all the publications. There was a great one that I saw that said communities are resilient. So I think that is very on point. But in addition to that, with species shifting their distributions, that will likely open up potential for restoration, areas that we may not be thinking about for restoration right now. But as those areas kind of shift up, they may open up areas where we want to be able to get in and put plants that we want to be in those places before those areas are invaded by other newer species. And then finally, a number of our leadership team went to the Pacific Ecological Security Conference organized by one of our core team members, Dr. Laura Brewington, and it had a large number of participants, over 100, with 14 different Pacific Island countries and territories. And they coalesced around some of the main things. And that's one of the take-home points I want to give you is, there's so many things that can be happening, but it's important to focus on what are some of the biggest, most important, invasive species out there that are threatening both native. So there are management plans for trying to address invasive ants across the US Pacific and coconut rhinoceros beetle, which Glenn will talk more about, and the importance of biological control and trying to get more facilities here in the Pacific. So that's my part of this, and we have a couple videos to share while we do the transition. So I'm gonna pop those up and then we'll go from there. Turn it over to Glenn.
Thank you, Elliot, very much. Folks, I would welcome you to go grab some lunch. I think it's all set back in the back here. Folks here in person, and a video playing, I guess, while we're doing that, right? Okay, thank you, Elliot. And then we'll go to Glenn and we'll ask a question. Folks, please grab some lunch.
You're cute, look. Yeah, kind of scary.
We want to do it one more time, the same one?
Darren.
Oh, okay. I've got two more.
Yeah, I know.
Marina, you're my best friend, my partner in crime. Marina, you're my best friend, my partner in crime, and I want to spend the rest of my
Took a long time to know what I wanted. Now I do. I won't wait.
Is that a yes? All right. Oh, yes.
Forever holding out for you.
You know what? I think I didn't share the sound. Let me try that again.
Oh.
That I will let Glenn answer that question. He's the one who shared them. But I think I didn't share the sound. So let me try.
Oh, Caitlin says she could hear this.
Oh, online they can hear the sound. Okay, good.
Yeah, Emily says she could hear.
Oh, they're already checked. Perfect.
Okay, one more video. Okay, ready. Enjoy this one. Thank you.
Marina, you're my best friend, my partner in crime, and I want to spend the rest of my
Took a long time to know what I wanted. Now I do. I won't wait on
Great. All right. Any others? You want to shift it over to Glenn then? Yeah, okay.
Glenn, you can share your screen whenever you're ready.
So you grab lunch, we're gonna go ahead and Glenn, get started here right now. Grab your seat when you can.
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
We hear you, Glenn, thanks.
All right, I can start, or you guys still eating?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Glenn?
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right. All right, thank you. Half day, good morning, or good afternoon for you guys. I'd like to thank PI-CASC for allowing me to speak on, I guess, my talk today, Micronesian Regional Biosecurity Perspectives. I am born and raised and actually from Guam. And although I'm talking about Micronesian regional biosecurity perspectives, it's more on really the responsibilities that Guam has to the region, as opposed to the entire region. I always love to start off with this slide. I usually talk to second graders, third graders, elementary students, and this cartoon usually captures catches their attention. It's just a cartoon showing the different invasive species on Guam. Usually kids, they don't really realize that the things that they see on a daily basis are invasive species. Like the feral pigs, the deer, even the brown tree snake, they just feel like it's a part of their normal fauna on the island. I try to drive home the point that invasive species are everyone's responsibility, whether you are a regular community member, doesn't matter the age, whether you're a second grader, a high school student, a college student, all the way to the levels of local government, regional politicians, and then even the international community. Sometimes I feel when I speak to I guess, high-level government officials, I speak exactly the same way that I speak to a second grader, and I still get the same reaction or the same points across. So forgive me if I address you as a second grader. So Micronesia. Micronesia is one of the 3 oceanic subregions. It's comprised of approximately 2,000 islands, 4 major island chains, and we have there are 5 independent nations and 2 territories of the United States, Guam being one of them. So Guam is the largest and most developed island in Micronesia. Well, it's also the most populated. Our primary economies are tourism and military, or military development. Despite being the largest and most developed island, we have very little agriculture on the island. Our agricultural economy produces less than 10% of the food consumed on the island. 90%, and I'm sure this is true for all the other islands throughout the world, 90% of all of our products are imported and brought in from off island, whether it be through plane or through boat. At our local commercial seaports, we bring in around 1,000 or 100,000 containers annually. It's over 1 million revenue tons of products that enter the island. And also, since we have the largest seaport in the region, a lot of those containers just transition on Guam and then make their way and filter out to the other islands. So this is just, I guess, a pathway map of one of the major shippers, seaport shippers on the island, Matson, but all the other, I guess, commercial sea shippers follow similar routes. And as you can see, there's a lot of pressure, biosecurity pressure, from the movement and importation of goods into Guam, both from Asia and also from the continental United States. And as I mentioned earlier, Guam is the regional transport hub for at least Micronesia, or at least the Marianas Islands and also Micronesia. Things get offloaded on Guam and then on get reappropriated onto smaller boats and get shipped to Palau, Yap, Chuuk, and the rest of the Micronesian islands. Similarly, Guam also has the largest airport in the region, which provides additional biosecurity pressure from air transport, both from tourists and from the importation of commercial goods. The United Airlines flight map showing Guam all bringing in different airlines or tourists, commercial cargo from Asia and throughout the world, and then moving back out into Micronesia. So I'd like to shout out to Laura, who's in the crowd, who made me aware of this new publication, which came out from SPREP and the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It's a guidance publication on preventing the movement of invasive species between islands in the Pacific countries and territories. So the point I'm trying to get across is that the movement of commercial goods and people, produces this insane, especially with Pacific Islands, since everything that we utilize is shipped in, almost everything is brought in. There's this insane biosecurity pressure and the possible introduction of invasive species with every single container, with every single tourist that enters the island. And then, it's through goods, vehicles, and it's all facilitated by people and the globalization of the economy. So if anything, or if my entire presentation doesn't make any sense to you, you can just go back. The link is at the bottom of my presentation. You can go back to this document and it explains very beautifully all the points that I'm trying to get across today. So again, Guam being the regional transport hub for the region, I guess historically has made us the biggest biosecurity risk to the region as well. Guam is home to 32 of the most invasive species in the world, 32 of the 100 most invasive species, and that's determined by an IUCN study, I think back in 2002. And the most infamous, the most infamous invasive species on the island, which makes Guam probably the most notable throughout the region, Pacific, and probably the world, is the brown tree snake. Guam had or used to have a very strong, diverse forest bird population. And because of the brown tree snake, only 3 of our native forest birds are still on the island. We have the Guam rail, which has, the Department of Agriculture has a strong breeding population of about 100 birds. Some of them are being reintroduced into a small isolated island just south of Guam, Cocos Island. Our Guam kingfisher, the sea heck, we have a very small population of 11 birds at the Department of Agriculture. None of these are being reintroduced into the wild yet. There are also other populations of the kingfisher. Well, I wouldn't call them populations, but they do have a breeding program with several zoos around the world that they're trying to use to build genetic diversity with the sea heck. And the only bird that is out in the wild is the Micronesian starling, the Sally bird. It's making a comeback. They're mostly located on the northern parts of the island. And there's a great deal of effort to try to protect them from the brown tree snake. But yeah. So this is another slide that I'd like to show to my elementary school students that I give a presentation to. It's an invasive species timeline of Guam. So Guam is approximately 300 million years old. The first ancient Chamorros were projected to colonize the island around 2000 BC. Westerners found Guam around 1521, Spanish with Magellan. And then there's the history of the war. The US retakes Guam from Japan in 1944. It's suggested that the brown tree snake was introduced to Guam in 1952. And then from 1952 all the way to 1998, 9 of the 11 birds disappear from the island. And in 1984, the Guam flycatcher goes extinct. The flycatcher was the only forest bird that went extinct. All the other forest birds that no longer reside on Guam are still present on other islands in Micronesia. And then here are a few more significant dates with the introduction of the PI-CASC scale, CRB in 2007, and the little fire ant in 2011. But what I like to mention to my students is that within a time span of 40 years, which is a blink of an eye, compared to the 30 million years that it took to generate this entire ecosystem. Within 40 years, it took one invasive species introduction to destroy most of our forest bird population. And the same is happening with the PI-CASC scale, CRB, and possibly little fire ants. So in 2003, the Asian PI-CASC scale was identified on Guam. The Asian PI-CASC scale, probably brought in through the ornamental plant trade, has been killing our endemic cycad trees, Cycas micronesca, or the fatting. So Cycas PI-CASC micronesca used to be the most abundant tree in Guam's forest ecosystem. Culturally, the Chamorros utilize the fruit as a nutrient or food source. And since the introduction of the Asian cycad scale, 90% of the cycad trees in our native forests have died. Through research and a lot of conservation efforts, the cycad is, I would say, slowly making a comeback. There's a lot of outplantings, and through pesticides, the cycad scale can be controlled, but the loss of 90% of the forest inventory is, I don't know if we'll ever rebound from that. Again, in relation to the rest of the region, the cycad scale has been identified in Rota in 2007, and now also in Palau in 2008. So not entirely sure if it left Guam to the outer islands or maybe the outer islands to Guam, but most likely I feel that egress originated from Guam to the outer islands. Let's see, what time is it? Okay, I'll try to go a little bit faster. So the other and last invasive species I'll talk about is the coconut rhinoceros beetle, specifically the one found in Guam, noted as the CRBG biotype. CRBG biotype is very important because CRB, coconut rhinoceros beetles, are found throughout the Pacific, and until 2007, when CRBG biotype was identified, there had been biological control methods available for the management of this invasive species. CRBG thus far has been resistant to biological control, and in Guam and wherever CRBG is found, massive or significant destruction of coconut trees have been occurring. So I talk to little kids all the time, and it makes it really sad that they have no concept of what a good looking coconut tree looks like. So pre-2007, before my kids were born, for most of these elementary kid students were born, this is what our coconut trees used to look like. And now in 2003, this is a picture we use over and over again to show the impacts of CRB. But this is like an everyday, I drive down the road, this is what the coconut trees look like in my neighborhood. This is what the coconut trees look like on campus. It's just normal now, and it's really sad that this is kind of accepted. And again, from a regional perspective, CRBG has moved from Guam to Hawaii, and more recently, again, to Rota in 2017. So we are the point source for so many different invasive species. And really from a regional perspective, we try, and we can only control what happens on Guam. So as a part of biosecurity, we try to control the egress at the ports of entry and focus all of our resources at the ports of entry. So initially, when CRB was introduced into Guam, we used these panel traps to catch CRB. Only really 10% effective in managing the populations, but what they're really good at is measuring the population. And so what we've done in the past few years is spread these throughout the different ports of entry to assess risk. So the map on the right is just a heat map, or it's a heat map showing different traps around the Guam International Airport. The larger the circle, the larger the trap catch rate. So we can identify specific areas of high biosecurity risk, which, I don't know, sadly for us, were cargo loading areas around the airport. We also do the same for the seaport. From this data over the past 3 years, looking at the individual traps, we've caught over 10,000, 11,000 beetles over the past 3 years. So around 3,000 CRB beetles or CRB adults removed from the breeding population from the ports of entry. Again, only 10% effective, so multiply by that 10. You know, we're missing a buttload of CRB adults that could be potentially jumping on a plane, jumping on a container or some cargo, and then making its way to the other islands, which we know already is happening. So looking at the same data, but as a rolling average this time, we can see seasonality in the CRB populations around the ports of entry. Additionally, the dotted line shows a gradual increase in the populations around the ports of entry. So this is very alarming. So despite our interdiction efforts, or what we call interdiction efforts so far, the population around the ports of entry is slowly increasing the egress risk. But what's cool is that we see this cyclical pattern showing where the highest, at what times of the year would there be the highest biosecurity risk, which helps us implement or focus our efforts with our other interdiction and management approaches, which include fungal biocontrol at breeding sites around the ports of entry. We have a pilot detector dog program where we have a team of 4 dogs and handlers searching conveyances and cargo, specifically only leaving Guam to susceptible islands that don't have CRB. You know, a lot of the traffic from United is from Guam to Hawaii, so that cuts out a lot of work for us since CRB is already in Hawaii. But we focus on the other islands. And then soon to start, we are going to try to replicate what's being done in Hawaii with palm tree pesticide injections to kill adults that are attacking palms around the ports of entry. Since this all costs a lot of money, and then as a manager, we try to focus on how best we can use that. We go, you know, from the previous data, try to figure out where we can focus our efforts based on the biology and the life cycle of the beetle. Shoot, I'm running out of time. So, but more or less, you guys get the idea. I hope that, you know, for breeding sites, since we know, you know, at certain points of the month or the year, you know, the populations are low, so they're probably still at a stage where they're in the breeding sites. We can utilize and deploy the fungal biocontrol. And at points where adults are actively feeding and moving around, and the highest probability that they'll jump onto cargo or conveyances, will activate the detector dogs, or at least make them more active during those times. Same thing with the tree injections while they're actively feeding. Since we can only inject the pesticides twice a year, we will try to do those around active feeding times where there's the highest biosecurity risk. So how does this connect with climate change? I'm not a climate change scientist whatsoever. And Elliot so much more eloquently described the interactions between climate change and invasive species, but more or less all I need to know is that storm intensity and storm frequency is increasing throughout the Pacific. And what this means for me and for Guam and for the region is the increase of green waste on the island. So storms, you know, with the massive destruction, destroy a lot of trees, generate a lot of green waste. And all of this is accumulating in and around the ports of entry. And this facilitates, and this is known on Guam, this facilitates the movement of invasive species from one point to another so quickly. Additionally, with the devastation of these increasing storms, the movement or the rapid movement of unchecked relief aid between the islands increases. So this is a picture of the largest plane in the world, or what used to be the largest plane in the world, the Anatov 225. So this was in 2018. FEMA contracted this Ukrainian company to move relief aid from Guam to the Northern Mariana Islands after Typhoon Mangkhut devastated the CNMI. So my boss and I would just sit out in the parking lot. We had a straight line of sight to this plane, and we would just watch them loading, morning, noon, and night, cargo, vehicles. And we would just stare at it. It's like, that's a really large opening for anything to just crawl into or to fly into. Is anyone checking all the cargo that's flying in there? Or is anyone checking the vehicles that are going in there to help the other outer islands? And we just stared at each other. It's like, no. And why is that? Because we were superseded just to get the aid out to the other islands. What's more important is human life. And we totally understand that. But since then, I know FEMA and the international community have taken steps to mitigate the spread of invasive species in these relief aid movements. So going back to climate change and to this graph, since we know that these storms are increasing in frequency, how does that affect the population of CRB? What would have been really nice throughout this 3-year time span is if Guam experienced some sort of cataclysmic typhoon where we would generate a ton of green waste and somehow the populations would have been affected for that. And then we can see, it's like if there is a typhoon and we start generating all this green waste, how does that affect the biosecurity risk, and how can we adapt our management or interdiction efforts to address that increased risk? So with a population shift, would it spike? We assume it would spike, but we have no real evidence that it would in response to a major typhoon. So my concerns are biosecurity practices and legislation leave little, sorry, I can't read this, present issues for Guam and the region. We have current management plans that only span 5 to 10 years, but climate change is predictive into the decades, right? So how can we expand out our management plans to account for climate change? And also the disparity that I see with invasive species and climate change research throughout the region and throughout the world. Guam is a really underserved community. I see the research and the climate change publications coming out of Hawaii and the continental United States, and they pale, or what we do in Guam pales in comparison to that. And I feel that since as a smaller island where we are more so impacted by climate change and invasive species very easily, I would love to see more research invested, or more funding research invested into our islands and our region. So solutions, I have no real solutions for any of this, but what helps and what I use as a guiding material is these massive biosecurity or plant management plans. So for Micronesia, we have the regional biosecurity plan that also includes Hawaii. It was funded by the Navy in 2015, and it's like this 4,000 page book that annotates and identifies biosecurity risks with each individual island. As a part of the Micronesian Regional Invasive Species Council, or I used to be a part of the Invasive Species Council, we would go through these objectives and goals and update this plan every few years to keep it relevant. And one of the things that is not included in this regional biosecurity plan, which I hope to address in the future, is the lack of a green waste management plan for the ports of entry, for Guam as a whole, and additionally for the region. And that's where, I guess, so I stole this slide from Elliot, and this is really a solution and a very helpful conference, the Pacific Ecological Security Conference, that brought together all the managers and all the different funding agencies to discuss and to reprioritize our needs. And for me, it enabled us, or myself, to meet the different funding agencies and discuss whatever crazy idea that I thought would help the region and hopefully make it a possibility. And especially in this time where we have the bipartisan infrastructure law, the IRA, and America the Beautiful, there's this massive influx of funding that's coming into biosecurity and invasive species management, where we can make a significant impact for the coming generations. And I guess I'll finish there. I'd like to acknowledge my different teams. I have my survey team, my dog team, and my CRB team, and then my different agencies that, or the different agencies that support our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Elliot.
Only left 2 minutes for questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for some questions. I'm not seeing any online at the moment. Why don't we start with any questions here in the audience?
Hey, Glenn, Jeff. Hear me?
Yeah, Jeff, I can hear you.
Hi. So why did tell me why the Guam subtype of the CRB evaded biocontrol? What happened there?
Oh, that's a biology question that I don't really know. It's just, it's resistant to, also, it's not resistant to the fungal biocontrol, but the fungal biocontrol is not a very good method of killing the rhino beetle. As a classical biocontrol, it kills off 20% of the population. What we do around the port of entry is we create artificial breeding sites, and we increase the concentration and the prevalence of the fungal pathogen, and it's 100% effective. So using it more as a pesticide as opposed to as a biocontrol, a self-spraying biocontrol agent. The virus, on the other hand, it's just a natural resistance to the virus. Yeah, it's a different genetic diversity, I suppose.
Thank you, Glenn. I see a comment from Dr. William Steiner in the line here. I welcome you to unmute if you'd like to say more, but I'll go ahead and read your comment. He suggests there needs to be a chemical study of deodorant in coconut trees that attracts the beetle to enable using it as a attractant. So I guess it's maybe a science question there. I don't know if any research like that has been done that you're aware of.
Yeah, there has been. So I know different teams are trying to improve on the pheromone that we use in the panel traps. There's also, the beetles are also attracted to different wavelengths of light. So at the University of Guam, University of Hawaii, and throughout the world, people are trying to optimize what attracts the beetle. And looking at the different chemical cues in the coconut trees is part of that, but no one has come up with the perfect attractant yet. With the coconut trees, yeah, it's not only the chemical cues, but it is also the visual infrared light cues that they're picking up on. Yeah, Roland has made the comment, like Roland has done some of this work as well.
Thanks, Glenn. Glenn, there's a question in there from JB Friday at the University of Hawaii. Are you able to see the chat? I see JB's online.
I can see the question. So JB is asking if people in Guam are taking LFA seriously. For example, are they testing plants before bringing them home to their farms? Yes. So, you know, it's all about educating the community and making them aware of the impacts. You know, not until people have them do they understand the impacts and the, you know, that they have, you know, even just being a nuisance. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I think it's a little bit too late for that now. Like LFA has spread throughout the island. People tried to control their own borders, but there's just so much jungle out there and unmanaged land that LFA is, it's just everywhere. You know, I'm hoping there will be a greater emphasis on the spread of little fire ants throughout the island now that it's made its way into our tourist center. So, you know, kind of like Waikiki, Guam has Tumon, and little fire ants are now flanking our major beaches and hotel areas. So I'm hoping that pushes more funding from the local government to work on little fire ant control and outreach.
Is there another question in the room? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure how to word my question yet. Oh, the mic.
I got
This one right here? Oh, you want me to hold this one? Okay, this one right here. Double mic. Not sure how to word my question yet, but maybe the room can help me. My question is like, there's so many militarized lands in Hawaii and Guam and these other parts of the Pacific that the risk is working in. Question is, I was really happy to see that the Navy funded this report that Glenn talked about. That's cool. Are they doing other things to help manage or eradicate or mitigate impacts from invasive species aside from just funding reports? Like, do they have their own teams to go?
Oh yeah, totally. So I don't like speaking for DoD, although I know a little bit about them. I've gone in trouble for this before. But Department of Defense is driven by their biological opinion, which is another massive plan that the DoD has written up. But in there, it mandates them to do a certain level of biosecurity. And I would say, you know, I'm very envious of their biosecurity team and the funding that they get. You know, they inspect 100% of the cargo and conveyances that go in and out of the island. You know, when they do military training exercises, but yeah, no, they do have a team that I know fairly well, and they do a great job, more so than we do. Yeah, and that's just a resource disparity there, but yeah, they do.
Thanks. We're past time, but I do see one more question in the chat. Maybe we can answer real quickly. Anybody knows that are all flights from Guam to Hawaii landed Honolulu only? Are they even traveling on to the other islands in Hawaii? Do we know?
So no, flights go from Guam to any other island besides Oahu.
Yeah.
So that's why we don't have to inspect any of the Hawaii flights. But I know eventually, and I think this is the way that Hawaii is headed towards. They're going to be doing inter-island inspections, if not already with their canine team. I thought, since Hawaii declared they're out of eradication mode now into management phase, I thought that's how I don't want to speak for HDOA, but I thought that's the direction they were going to.
Well, join me one more round of applause for Elliot. Folks, please join us at our next Slice of PI-CASC seminar on Tuesday, May 2nd at noon Hawaii time. We'll be joined by Dr. Dennis LaPointe from USGS Pacific Islands Ecosystem Research Center. Share with us on climate change, larval mosquito habitat and riparian corridors, potential pathways to mosquito invasion and malaria transmission at Hakalau Forest National Wildlife Refuge. Please look out for reminders and links to that upcoming talk in your email, or visit the PI-CASC website under events and information for that sign up link. Also, if you're online, as you log off, please take a couple minutes to complete the survey that'll pop up. For those of you joining us in person, please join us for a slice of pie. Rachel Lenz has kindly baked another pie for us, key lime this time. So thank you, Rachel. Yeah, and thank you, Rachel, for all your help in organizing and running our seminars. So appreciate that. Thanks to Lisa and Kristen for their help in providing lunch. Look forward to seeing you all in May. Thank you for coming.